It's been a while since I put together an installment in this Racing Games collection series of mine, with episodes previously focusing on the interesting games for the Commodore 64, along with that epic dive into the library of racing games released for the Mega Drive. As we come to the end of yet another interesting year, it seems only fitting to close it out with another installment of the series, this time going back to the 8-bits in the form of a look into the racing games of the Master System. Once again, this video will focus on racing experiences, games where you're either racing through a series of checkpoints or on courses against rivals, those which are more focused on taking them down. The examples being the likes of Chase HQ, Action Fighter or Fire and Forget 2 aren't really the focus here. Before the green flag drops though, there is one game I'd wanted to include in the list, but technical reasons resulted in it did not qualify. The Master System port of Codemaster's Micro Machines. The reason for this is down to Micro Machines being designed to use video modes which are only available on the Master System too. So when played on my original Model 1 console, the result was a solid purple screen, which I feel goes a long way to explaining why this is one of those games which is so ridiculously expensive on the secondary market. Alas. Enough with the pre-race talk though, as now it's time to get the proceedings underway and check out those Master System racing games. With Sega's heritage in arcade gaming, it's no surprise their home systems would receive conversions of many of their titles. But with the vast difference in capabilities between the superscale arcade boards and the humble Master System, it's about how well they play over technical accuracy. So let's check out how well the Master System handles them. Which brings us to the first, 1987's Enduro Racer. Of all the conversions released, this one deviates the most from the source material. Where the original arcade machine was played from the standard third-person view, its Master System counterpart is played from a zoomed-out oblique one. If only the perspective was changed, it would be a game that one could say would have a very short lifespan, considering the arcade original was about making it to the end of a 5-stage course. But there's quite a bit added here to make this one somewhat more fun. The big change is the introduction of damage. Instead of being thrown off your bike upon colliding with rivals or obstacles, smaller collisions will just incur some damage and slow you down. Though if you do hit a big obstacle, you'll still be thrown clear from your bike. Until you max it out, damage doesn't really have any effect on your bike's performance. Once you do, however, you'll see the timer tick down at a much faster rate. It can be seen as a harsh penalty for poor gameplay, but it at least gives you an opportunity to complete the stage you're on. Between each race, you'll be taken to a shop which lets you buy performance boosts, but also perform some repairs as well. These are paid for by passing your rivals, with a point earned for each you successfully pass. The last thing worth noting is the structure. For the Western Master System release, there's 5 courses which you'll need to race twice to make a complete run. Things get far more interesting with the original Japanese Mark III release, which offers double the courses. So rather than doing 5 courses twice over, now you'll be doing 10 twice over instead. The Japanese version of the game also offers a better sense of progression, thanks to the refined course ordering employed as well. So, if you have the means to play this version of the game, it's certainly the better version on account of that. But if not, the Western release is still great fun to play, providing you're open to that different perspective and the extra mechanics which are added in, of course. Arcade purists might want to stay away. Next, we've got the oldest game on the list, Hang On, released in 1985. As one of the launch titles for both the Mark III in Japan and the Master System in the West, I'm sure it's one that many fans of the system will have spent time with, especially as it tended to be built into many older Model 1 consoles, just like mine. This one does fare much closer to the spirit of the arcade game, as you'll be racing to complete each course before you run out of time. Each course consists of 5 stages, and each offers a unique environment to racing. The visuals are something I feel really draws me into Hang On, both its usage of colour, making for a great demonstration of those blue skies in games, but also the speed. Compared to races released on other systems of the time, the pace here is incredibly quick, at least once you get up to speed. Combined with the very high frame rate of the visuals, I find it feels absolutely incredible to see in motion and to play. Zipping around your rivals and aiming to keep your bike at the very edge of control is something I find to be quite thrilling. In fact, I found Hang On to be one of those games which is real great to zone out to. So, it might not carry the mechanical depth of many of the other games featured in this video, but if you're after something which is easy to pick up and zone out to, then Hang On is seriously a darn good title to choose. Besides, if you're rocking an original Master System, it's very likely that it's built into the console, so you're not going to need to hunt it down. But if not, it's one which is pretty easy to acquire, should you be into the physical collecting side of the deal. If any of the games in this roundup were to strike a serious chord, it would no doubt be Outrun. This Master System conversion was released in 1987, a year after its groundbreaking arcade release, and quite frankly has got to be one of the most high-profile conversions released on the machine. Which would all be for naught if it thankfully wasn't such a great port, even factoring the old PAL slowdown into the mix. The goal is to drive from the sunny shores of Coconut Beach to one of 5 destinations. As you approach the end of each stage, you can of course pick which one you'll drive to next. It might seem like such a simple idea in practice, but even here, watching those scenery transitions between stages is oh so impressive all these years later. But that would be for nothing if the game didn't play well, and it certainly does that. Control of your car feels great, and the game responds to your inputs quickly. The visuals offer that great sense of style, especially keeping to the blue skies in games aesthetic, despite the more limited palette the hardware offers. This of course carries into its widely appreciated soundtrack. The Master System's base sound hardware provides some neat covers of the arcade game's soundtrack. Though more impressively, it includes an FM version for those lucky enough to rock a Japanese Master System, Mark III with the FM sound unit, a modded Western Master System, or a Mega Drive with an appropriate flash cartridge. This improved version of the soundtrack is much closer to that of the arcade original and makes a wonderful experience even better. Outrun for the Master System is an absolute top-tier port of the arcade classic. Sure, in Space Year 2021, there are far better and more accurate ways to enjoy it, but conversions this good shouldn't be tossed away for nothing. It does just about everything right and makes for a great way to experience those blue skies in an 8-bit form. The final arcade game we're looking at is Super Off-Road, converted by Graph Gold and published by Virgin Games in 1993. That puts this one off to a great start, especially knowing how good Graph Gold's home computer ports were regarded. It also stands out amongst the crowd for being the only single-screen racing game released for the Master System, which makes it a prime pick for one you can enjoy with a friend. As you'd expect, you're racing off-road trucks over a series of courses. To qualify for the next, you'll need to make sure you finish ahead of all the computer-based rivals. Should any of them beat you, you can move on to the next track, but at the cost of one of your credits. Which is probably the one thing I don't dig with this version, especially if you're playing solo. It means you've really got to be at the top of your game, with little room for error, even early on. That is, of course, down to the old shove those credits in mentality of arcade games, but I digress. Between each race, you've got the opportunity to use prize winnings to upgrade your truck, but it's not only about placing high, which will earn money, but also locating the cash pickups which occasionally appear during the race. Along with those extra boosts, of course. One aspect to this conversion I seriously dig is that the track order is very different to that of the computer ports. Rather than repeat the early ones multiple times in a game, you play them all in sequence, which is great to see a wider variety of what is actually on offer. Doubly so, because the order is quite different from those versions too. Though it offers a serious challenge for the solo player, if you're able to bring a friend along, then Super Off-Road is quite a fun game to play. It's got great presentations, tight controls, and lots of playability, plus plenty of challenge as well. The arcade was without a doubt a massive part of the Master System's draw, but that doesn't mean arcade conversions were all it was about. There were plenty of games which originated on other machines, which made the jump over as well. But only a few racing games, and so here they are. Something which can feel like a hit to the heart is when you see the name of a beloved franchise attached to something which isn't worthy of the name. And let me tell you this, Outrun Europa for the Master System well and truly exemplifies this. Developed by Probe Software and published by US Gold in 1992, I guess you shouldn't be entirely surprised at the results. It all starts with its setup, as yes, there's a story here. You're a secret agent who's had his sweet ride stolen. A sweet ride which just happens to be carrying some top secret documents. And so you find a conveniently located bike and ride off in pursuit to recover them, whilst while dodging the police, rival agents, and more, to avoid being thrown in the slammer. Each of the game's stages takes place in a different country, and usually has you finding a new vehicle to take charge of, so there's plenty of variety to enjoy as you're racing along. But it all feels so painful to play, from the controls requiring you to continually hold up to accelerate, to the horrendous scaling applied to the roadside objects. It truly feels rough in comparison to many other games, especially those shown in this video. More critically though, it's less about driving and more about dodging. You'll be under constant harassment by your rivals, and outrunning them slowly becomes an exercise in frustration. Mainly because you'll be constantly having to avoid bumping into them as it slowly saps your shield. Yes, a shield. That's exactly the kind of setup here which makes this one just not that good to play. Especially when contrasting it against the other games in this video, you can see why it doesn't feel all that good to play or nice to look at. I'll admit, there are other versions of this game which I find okay to play, and perhaps those might have been better received as well, if they were an original game instead of having the Outrun name attached to them. But for this Master System version, all I can really say is that it's a travesty, which wouldn't change at all for anything. Now for something a bit more violent than what we've seen so far. It's Road Rash, which appeared on the Master System in 1993, published by US Gold, and again converted by Probe Software. Now, I know what you're thinking here, that with them in charge, especially after looking at Outrun Europa, that it's going to be a right royal mess of a port, right? Right? Thankfully, things are much, much, much better on this occasion. As with the original Mega Drive version, the goal is to take your bike and race to the finish over a series of courses. Each level consists of 5 races, and to move to the next, you want to make sure you finish in the top 3 in all of them. Not only does it mean you'll qualify for the next run, but you'll also earn cash, and that is necessary to buy a more powerful ride and help even the score on later levels. Of course, you're not only dealing with the road, but also your rivals. And whilst you can overtake them to make progress up the ranks, you can also get into some fisticuffs and knock them down to help earn a bit of distance. They will do the same to you, though they're honestly not the biggest threat you'll face. Instead, that'll be the traffic. Whether it's oncoming or passing by at intersections, they'll pack a serious wallop, leaving you scrambling to recover your bike, wasting valuable time in the process. Considering the gulfing capabilities between the Master System and its blast processing capable sibling, this version comes off pretty darn well. The visuals are reworked to better suit the hardware, and it all moves about at a solid pace. In fact, at times even a little smoother than its 16-bit counterpart. The controls are a joy to play with, as even without a direct control for applying brakes, though the courses are tweaked and adjusted to handle this, as are the bikes, which are slightly slower as well. If you've got access to the Mega Drive version, then this Master System one may be kind of redundant, but if you don't, it's a conversion which generally is far better than it should have had any right to be, especially this late in the Master System's life. We've had arcade game ports, we've had ports from other systems. Now it's time for the truly exciting stuff, those racing games which are exclusive to the Master System. When it comes to Master System originals, we've got to kick off with one of the more exciting ones on offer, Buggy Run, a 1993 release developed by Sims and published by Sega. The main mode pits you over a 15 race championship, broken up into beginner, intermediate and expert leagues. Progressing from one to the next requires you to place high by the end of each set of tracks. Thankfully, having a bad race or two won't immediately disqualify you, which goes a long way to making this one a fair experience. Which is certainly a positive for me. The racing is fast and furious. Even with just 3 other rivals on the course, you'll need to be taking some good racing lines and know what you're doing to succeed. At least until you get some upgrades of course, which happens after each race. The shop offers the usual assortment, like engines which improve your speed, tyres to help with grip, and transmission which helps your acceleration. There's also steering and suspension upgrades which improve your car's handling. All of them are very handy, of course. But then there's the other stuff. Mines that drop behind your car and if used well can knock an opponent out of the race for a brief moment. A moment which is just long enough to help solidify a lead. Especially when you use them with the nitros, which offer a short burst of speed. You can also get upgrades which allow you to carry more as well. The racing itself is quite fun, and the courses in this main mode are plenty challenging, with plenty of thrills when in action. It offers enough of a solid package to keep you playing. But then, there are the extra modes on offer. With a second player, you can partake in a separate race mode, which isn't aligned to the main championship, so you can flip through the courses at will and see them all. There's the battle mode, which channels arcade classic Motos and has you battling solo, or with a friend to knock your rivals off into the lava-filled void. What it doesn't chalk up in innovation, Buggy Run certainly chalks up with fun. I certainly had a great time with it, even if that was just in the single player modes. It's a shame that being such a late release means it's ridiculously hard to acquire, and one not likely to see a reissue anytime soon. GP Rider, a Tiertex, yes, that Tiertex release, published by Sega in 1993, is one of those games which may share a name with a prior Sega arcade game, but happens to play nothing like it at all. Things look promising from the outset with 3 modes on offer. The arcade mode lets you race a 4-lap race over a single course. The Grand Prix mode lets you play out a full championship season over 15 courses, with the tournament allowing you to run a small run over a subset of those courses. Each race is run in 2 phases, qualifying and the race itself. You'll get the chance to customize your bike setup before each, which is rather important as you'll need to be ready for changing weather conditions between the sessions. All of this makes for quite a neat setup to start from, though once you take to the track itself, things don't go quite so well. The first thing which is very apparent is how tiny the viewing area is. Regardless of whether you're playing solo or with a friend, the game itself is presented in a split-screen view at all times, which offers a very cramped viewing of the proceedings. In itself, it's not much of an issue, but when combined with the sprite scaling used for your rivals, it can be quite easy to misjudge where you're going, and end up crashing, which happened way too often for my liking. Something else which makes the racing unique is the time limit, simulating your bike's fuel supply. One which is magically refilled as you start new laps. How much you get on each lap depends on how you've set the bike's fuel mixture up. Certainly a weird way to race the challenge, but okay. There's a core of something interesting to GP Rider, but the truth is, it certainly doesn't live up to it. There are some nice presentations and visuals, but the tiny gameplay area, even when playing solo, combined with that rough scaling of your rivals, makes it one which isn't fun to play at all. Earlier on, I talked about the port of Outrun, stating it was an absolute highlight amongst the Master System's racing game library. So the idea of more Outrun should be great, right? Alas, Outrun 3D, in its attempt to go for spectacle, kind of misses the mark in comparison to its non-3D counterpart. The main feature behind this version of the game is the support for the Master System's 3D glasses. This also contributes to its biggest flaw in my eyes, the sluggishness. Whilst the original Outrun was still playable despite its slower speed on PAL systems, the slowdown hits quite hard in Outrun 3D, making it truly unbearable at points for me. But it's still Outrun, right? Yes. Though to work properly in 3D, there have been a few tweaks to the game. Whether you'll think they'll have a big impact on the game or not is up to you, as they range from removing the wide 5-lane roads in some stages to removing the famous stone arches in others. There are some interesting environmental additions to make up for this though, so it's not all doom and gloom. Visually, things are as colourful and as defined as the original game, though some of the sprites are a little smaller than their non-3D counterparts. It's a bit of a step backwards for me though, feeling not quite as great as those in the original game. The most drastic change is around the music, which throws out my beloved Splash Wave, along with Passing Breeze, and brings 3 new tracks into the mix. Maybe I'm just being resistant to change, but these new tracks just don't click with me. They lack that Outrun vibe, which is honestly a big draw of the game in my eye. Interestingly, though not released in Japan, FM sound support is present, so if you've got a modded system, then you can check that version of the soundtrack out as well. If Outrun 3D was the only version released for the Master System, I'd say it would be worth your time to check it out. But considering the original conversion is available, and can be acquired at a far more reasonable price, well, it's a no-brainer to skip this one and go for the original instead. Unless you really want to try it out in 3D mode and have the means to actually do so. The last of the original Master System releases is Absolute Entertainment's RC Grand Prix, published in 1989 by Seismic in the US and Sega themselves in Europe. This one is about racing tiny remote-controlled cars over a series of 10 courses. In itself, it's not all that special. But what does, though, is the way it just happens to be set up. All of these courses take place on the same map. As you get further and further into the game, you'll find some courses intersect, and if you're not careful, that means you'll end up on the wrong course, which carries consequences. Consequences reinforced by the very tight time limits imposed on each course. This is important to note as progress onto the next race requires you to finish each course in set time, but also to place in the top 3. Fail to do either of those, and it's game over, with no continues available. Placing in as high a position as possible is important, as you'll earn prize money which you can put to use towards upgrading your car from the shop between races. Available upgrades range from engines, which improve your speed, tyres to improve your grip, suspension which gives you better handling, batteries letting you run the engine at full power for longer, and the gears offer improved acceleration. The no-frills racing I feel offers a great experience here, especially with the challenges provided by the courses, featuring a mix of tight corners, plus a relatively zoomed-in view as well. Something I found real helpful was the way the game gives you sufficient warning of upcoming turns, with arrows indicating what direction you'll need to take, and a warning tone, which is enough to get you ready to turn. Something I couldn't explore was the multiplayer mode, which has up to 4 players taking it in turns within each race, which makes the journey through the season feel that bit more exciting. Some may decry it, but I feel it would make a multiplayer match that bit more special. I wasn't sure what to expect when I fired up RC Grand Prix, but truth be told, I found it quite a lot of fun and a solid challenge to boot. Though it took a few runs to get to grips with the handling. Once I did, I felt things handled pretty darn well. It's certainly one which I think is well worth looking at least in my books. We've seen arcade conversions. We've seen conversions from other systems, and even a set of Master System exclusives. But now, we've got to see what is the most popular form of racing game on the machine, Formula 1. First out of the pack is Domark's F1, developed by Tech and published in 1993. As the only racer to carry the official license on the machine, you'd expect things to be quite special here, right? Sadly, it's not entirely the case here, especially with a few limitations which it offers. F1 gives you 2 modes from the outset. The arcade mode lets you race across the available 8 tracks in any order you desire. The goal within each race is to qualify by finishing higher and higher in the pack. The Grand Prix mode lets you race the courses in order, though this time you'll need to run a qualifying lap to set your starting place. It also brings the ability to tune your car for each course, which can help make or break a race. As for the racing itself, I think it does an alright job of things. It certainly evokes more than the arcade-style gameplay seen with some of the other games in this video, as you'll certainly need to be ready to hit the brakes to tackle corners properly, and your rivals offer quite the challenge as well. Depending on how well you take care of the car, you'll likely need to take a pit stop, especially during the longer races. It's just that actually making the stop I found to be an incredibly tricky process, requiring a lot of precision to land them, which is something I found I could never really pull off in my time with the game. The biggest oddity I found with F1 is that despite holding the official license, there's only 8 tracks available to race on. It may not seem like too much of a step back in the arcade mode, but for the full championship mode, it's something which can really be noticed, especially as other games happen to include far more courses as well. The first of Sega's own contributions we're looking at is Super Monaco GP, released in 1990. You may think this would be a conversion of the arcade game like its 16-bit counterpart, but alas, it's most certainly not. Gone is any form of arcade mode, and instead the focus is on winning the Drivers' Championship across 16 races. Prior to each race, you'll have the chance to take a practice run to get used to the course and the game's unique control scheme, as whether you choose to use automatic or manual gears results in the game being played in quite a different way. With the former, it's similar to other races in that you use the 1 and 2 buttons to accelerate and brake respectively. It's very handy for getting an understanding of how the car operates. Selecting one of the manual transmission options is a whole other kettle of fish. Effectively, your car automatically accelerates, with its top speed set by its chosen gear. So that means instead of braking to handle a tight corner, you need to rapidly downshift to get to the right speed to take it. Now, this part of the control scheme works, and in a way, does make it a bit more approachable for newbies. But it's not enough to save you from the most horrendous steering you're handling in existence. I feel that Super Monaco GP is trying to act a bit more like a simulator than a regular arcade game, which is a great idea, in theory. I just found it didn't work though. What I found happened is that you'll approach a corner, slow down for it, and try to take the racing line. But you can't hold the direction you wish to turn for too long, as otherwise you'll spin out. Which is what happened to me, repeatedly. I only found success in taking the tougher corners at a much slower speed than the computer-controlled drivers could, which made qualifying quite the chore because no matter how well I did, I always started from the back of the pack. Which puts additional pressure on for the race itself, as to qualify for the next one, you've got to finish in the top 10. Now, that's actually a fair requirement, but the challenge of getting there is far tougher than I feel it should be, and it's all because of the car's handling. Which is really the key here, as Super Monaco GP wouldn't be that bad a game if it weren't for that. The steering is just enough to truly throw all but the most patient racers off their game and drive them away from it, which is quite a sad set of circumstances. So the original Super Monaco GP was, well, not quite what I expected, that's for sure. So I won't lie, it did make me feel somewhat trepidatious in checking its sequel out, particularly as on the 16-bit side of the fence, it was just a refinement of its predecessor. But thankfully, that is not the case here with Super Monaco GP2 on the Master System. The structure has been pared back, offering just the free practice or World Championship modes. The former lets you take a run on any track, with the latter letting you work your way through the World Championship a course at a time. The goal here is simply to earn the most points at the end of the final race, which admittedly, it is pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. The same can be said for the pre-race setup, where you'll get the chance to set up your car for the race. Like with the first game, the choice of automatic or manual transmission impacts how you control a car when on the course. The important news though, is the car handling is seriously improved. Seriously. As in, I could actually get it around corners at high speed improved. So the racing here is far more fun as a result. Not only that though, the gameplay structure is far fairer too. You don't need to qualify above a certain place to move to the next race, and between races, the game issues passwords which you can use when starting up a new session to continue right from where you left off. Those are both relatively minor details in the scheme of things, but the result is that I found Super Monaco GP2 to be a game I found myself seriously enjoying as I was capturing footage. It's genuinely a fun racer to drive. And slowly working your skills up to the point where you can tune the car for maximum performance and still keep it on the track is something which was incredibly rewarding. If you are looking for Super Monaco GP2 to be closer in spirit to the Mega Drive version, you might be a little disappointed. I'd say the same would apply if you also wanted it to bring something new to the table. But for me, it offers a satisfying and fun experience, which is well above and beyond what its predecessor could have hoped to have achieved. Super Racing, a 1988 release from Sega, marks a couple of unique entries for this list. Firstly, it's the only game here which was released as a Japanese exclusive. Secondly, it's the only one which uses an overhead scrolling view. Which is surprising, as there are plenty of games using that view on rival machines. But I digress. Super Racing has you taking part in one of 3 championships. The beginner level offers 5 races, the average with 8, and finally Expert gives you the full experience over all 15 courses. Like many of these overhead races, though the tracks are named after the countries they're situated in, the actual layouts leave much to the imagination, which is a bit of a shame, at least in my book. When it comes to the racing itself, things are pretty straightforward. You're offered 2 setup choices before each race, one for high speed courses and one for more technical ones. What this results in is a trade-off between higher top speed or faster acceleration, the results of which are also impacted by which of the teams you chose when starting out. So if you chose one of those lower tier teams, you could find yourself seriously struggling for speed, especially if you pick the wrong setup. something the game expects you to know from memory, as the manual offers no layout information on the game's courses. The racing is where things ended up being a bit of a letdown for me. The courses are so short that the average lap time is about 10 to 15 seconds long, so races on the beginner level take up no time at all, each being 3 laps long. Things do get more challenging on the average level, where races are 10 laps long, and with the expert mode, where you'll be surviving for 20 laps. Which also brings pit stops into the equation, except you don't really get an indication on whether you need them, and at the times I used them, I found my rivals didn't, and it took me well out of contention for the race when it happened. Now it was either that, or I chose a team which was so overpowered that I took the lead in qualifying and never looked back when the race started. This is a bit of a shame for me because I've got quite an affinity for these kind of races, as we've seen in the other parts of the series, and at first glance I thought this one had some serious potential. Sadly though, it doesn't live up to it at all, meaning it's one which became a real drag in no short order once I put some serious playtime into it. Alas. The final Master System Formula 1 game is 1986's World Grand Prix. I'll admit, this one certainly was tough to categorise, but that shouldn't get in the way of this early one, which satisfies that secret rule about systems of the era needing to have games which try to squeeze pole positions mechanics for a home market. It also serves as an upgrade to GP World on the Master System's predecessor, the SG-1000 family, at least in terms of its setup, which has you competing over a series of 12 courses based on those used in the 1976 F1 season. Your goal in each is to complete a single lap as fast as possible ahead of the given qualifying time. Succeed, you'll move on to the next course, whilst failing will end your run right there and then with no continues available. The racing here isn't fancy, as it's just about getting up to speed and dodging rivals as you approach them. Some keep to their lane, others might pull a surprise lane change, hoping to trick you into making a mistake and crashing. Learning the lay of each course is real handy, as getting to the finish line quicker will earn you more points, which isn't just for score, as you can trade them in to upgrade your car's acceleration, handling, or top speed. Once again, these upgrades only last for a single race, so don't get too attached to them, as you'll need to rebuy them for each race you need them. Which is a fine mechanic, if not for the fact that they can be quite expensive to acquire. Like GP World, World Grand Prix also features the track editor, which allows you to assemble your own course to race on, and race to see who can get the best time. Sadly, you can't replace any of the game's courses with your own, and neither can you save it out, which I find limits the potential of this feature somewhat. World Grand Prix is a bit like Hang On in that its racing is somewhat simplistic compared to many others, but it still manages to make for some fun racing, at least in short bursts. Thankfully, it too is one of those which is quite affordable for those who want the actual cartridge. And so, the checkered flag drops. But before I sign off from the virtual commentary box, I wanted to just acknowledge the overall quality of what's on offer here for the Master System with its racing games. Sure, there's a few games I found which weren't all that fun to play. Games like Super Monaco GP with its, shall I say, eccentric handling, or Outrun Europa with just how dull it is, from the visuals to its pacing and everything else. But that's okay, because there are plenty of cracking games which I feel you should focus on instead. From the original Outrun, which I feel defines the Master System aesthetic on so many levels. Despite the wide gulf in power between it and the arcade hardware, it still delivers the feeling of Outrun, even if it can't deliver the graphic or audio part of the experience. To Road Rash, a conversion which continues to carry on that tradition. It may not live up to the visuals and audio of the Mega Drive original, but it manages to bring the gameplay over intact, and that of course is the most important part of any conversion. or Buggy Run, which offers a solid single-player experience with its variety of courses. It also offers a great amount of gameplay with friends though, between its battle mode and separate head-to-head mode as well. Finally, there's Super Monaco Grand Prix 2, which takes the concept behind the original, but refines the playability and challenge, making it incredibly rewarding to take a lead in a race. Plus, having a password system might not be as exciting as a battery backup, but it shows it's a game which respects its players' time. These 4 may be my top picks of the Master System's racing game library, but of course, they're certainly just the tip of the iceberg. I hope this inspires you to check these games out for yourself, or the wider library of the machine in general. The Master System's library may be known for many other things, but these games are certainly worth taking the time to explore. As always, videos like this are a way for me to explore my own curiosity around the machines I collect for. It's a natural way to see the styles of gameplay which come naturally and which don't to a given platform. So I hope the video inspires you to do the same, as unsurprisingly, going outside of the familiar can be incredibly rewarding when you discover a new gem which is worth playing or worth talking about. And with that, as I close out on another year, there's nothing really more for me to say than to thank you very much for watching as always.